reminding America of its human side. The CBS newsman died Friday in New York, but left his road trip tales as a legacy.
Why would America's most trusted storyteller live a lie? For decades, Charles Kuralt was the warm voice that brought comfort into living rooms, showing us small-town heroes, quiet kindness, and the hidden heart of the nation. But behind that gentle smile was a secret life no one saw coming. 2 families, 2 homes, decades of deception. How did the man who embodied honesty pull off one of the greatest double lives in American television? And what does it reveal about the man we thought we knew? Stay tuned. This story will shock you. Charles Bishop Kuralt was born on September 10, 1934 in Wilmington, North Carolina, but his parents didn't stay there long. His mother, Ina, had gone there only to give birth in a hospital. Soon after, they returned to her parents' tobacco farm in Enslow County. Life on the farm was hard. There was no electricity, no plumbing, just wood stoves for heat and a pump on the porch for water. But young Charles thrived in this simplicity. He flew homemade kites out of old newspapers, carved slingshots from branches, and listened to the wind rattle through the fields. Every summer, he helped his grandparents with the tobacco harvest, tying leaves to sticks and hanging them in the barn to cure. But what he loved most were the long wagon rides to the market, where his grandmother told him stories about bandits on the road. Those tales, half history, half imagination, planted the seeds of a storyteller. The Kuralt family moved often, never staying in one place for too long. From Washington, North Carolina to Atlanta, and finally to Charlotte, each new city brought change. But in Charlotte, young Charles Kuralt discovered the passion that would shape his entire life: radio. At just 14 years old, when most teenagers were still figuring out who they were, Charles was already living like a professional. He wasn't simply another student. He was announcing minor league baseball games with the confidence of a grown man and hosting a music program on Waze Radio. His voice carried warmth, calm, and authority, a style that would later become his signature. That same year, he entered the Voice of Democracy contest, a national competition that sought the best young speakers in America. Out of thousands, Charles stood out. He won. The prize was life-changing. He earned a $500 scholarship, an invitation to Washington, D.C., and a handshake with President Harry Truman himself. For a 14-year-old boy, it was the kind of validation that proved his talent was undeniable. Standing in colonial Williamsburg, on the very spot where Patrick Henry once declared, "Give me liberty or give me death," Charles delivered his winning speech. His words carried boldness, pride, and hope. Even then, his voice reflected the American spirit, steady, confident, and full of promise. Back home in Charlotte, Charles continued to excel. At Central High School, his classmates voted him most likely to succeed. They were right. By the time he entered the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill in 1951, his career was already well underway. He worked at local radio stations, covered college football and basketball games, and edited the daily Tar Heel, the student newspaper. But Charles was never content with safe stories. His editorials were fiery, bold, and controversial. He openly challenged racial segregation, mocked censorship, and criticized university policies. He was fearless with his words, even when they drew the wrath of local politicians. While others avoided risk, Charles embraced it. To him, journalism wasn't about pleasing authority. It was about confronting it. His drive paid off. By the age of 23, Charles Kuralt was hired by CBS News, becoming the youngest correspondent in the network's history. Only 2 years later, at 25, he was chosen to host Eyewitness to History, covering one of the most significant political events of the century, the Nixon-Kennedy debates. 77 million Americans tuned in, and they trusted him immediately. Calm, direct, never fake. But Kuralt's career wasn't built in comfortable studios. CBS sent him into danger: street riots in Latin America, bloody battles in Vietnam, and the tense front lines of the civil rights movement. In Vietnam, he once admitted, half the company he was filming was wiped out in an ambush. He and his crew survived only by luck. It was brave, necessary work, but it drained him. By 1967, weary of war, politics, and the relentless race for breaking news, Charles Kuralt wanted something gentler, something real. So he pitched an idea that seemed strange at the time. What if I just hit the road? No assignments, no deadlines, just drive across America and see what I find. That simple idea would change television forever. At first, executives thought it was a joke, but they agreed as long as he kept the costs low. With a cameraman and a beat-up motorhome stocked with peanut butter and soda, he began what would become one of the most beloved series in television history, On the Road. For the next 25 years, Charles Kuralt became the country's traveling storyteller. He logged more than 1 million miles, crisscrossing America's back roads, not its highways. He met 99-year-old bricklayers, school teachers who taught 3 generations in the same one-room schoolhouse, and men who built houses out of beer bottles. He celebrated jugglers, rodeo riders, ball-of-string collectors, and blind mountain climbers. Each story was simple. 2 minutes of humanity tucked into broadcasts otherwise filled with war and scandal. Time magazine called them 2-minute ceasefires. Viewers adored him. While other journalists chased scandal, Kuralt chased joy. He won Peabody Awards, Emmys, and, more importantly, the trust of millions. When CBS Sunday Morning launched in 1979, they made him the host. His voice became part of America's weekends. Quiet, reflective, trustworthy. But off-camera, his life wasn't as simple as he made it seem. In 1962, Charles had married a lawyer named Suzanne Petty Baird. To the world, they looked like a steady New York couple. She handled the finances, hosted dinner parties, and kept their Manhattan home. But in 1968, everything changed. On assignment in Reno, Nevada, Charles met Patricia Shannon, a divorced mother of 3. He showed up at her door with roses. They talked all night. It was the beginning of a secret relationship that would last nearly 3 decades. Charles moved Patricia closer, first to New York, then to Colorado. He helped her through a divorce, paid her bills, even bought her land in Montana. While his legal wife thought he was working, he was living another life. Over the years, he sent Patricia the equivalent of more than $4 million in today's money. He bought her houses, paid for her children's college, and signed letters, Pop. He taught her daughter to drive. He brought her son along on CBS assignments, introducing him as his own. To keep the secret, he built a cabin on 90 acres in Montana. To his wife, he said it was just a fishing retreat. In truth, it was the home he planned to retire to with Patricia. For 29 years, Charles Kuralt lived in 2 worlds. One as America's trusted voice of truth. The other as a man bound by a lie so complete, it fooled his wife, his colleagues, and millions of viewers. In June 1997, Kuralt was dying in a New York hospital. Lupus was tearing his body apart. Just 16 days before his death, he wrote Patricia a final letter. I'll have the lawyer visit the hospital to be sure you inherit the rest of the place in Montana, if it comes to that. On July 4, 1997, Charles Kuralt passed away. At his funeral, Patricia Shannon arrived, with that letter in her hand. His wife, Petey, stunned, realized her husband had been living a second life. The revelation exploded into court. The Montana property, worth more than $600,000, was fought over bitterly. In 2000, the Montana Supreme Court sided with Patricia, declaring her the rightful heir. Kuralt's daughters, shocked and betrayed, were left with nothing but fragments of their father's reputation. The world eventually learned everything. In 2002, Patricia Shannon published her memoir, Charles and Me, exposing decades of poems, phone calls, trips, and gifts. The man who had been the nation's conscience had fooled not only his wife, but the entire country. How could America's most trusted storyteller have lived such a lie? Was it weakness, desire, or was it proof that even the most beloved voices carry shadows we'll never see? Charles Kuralt's story is a contradiction. On one hand, he gave us some of the most tender portraits of American life ever captured. He reminded a nation divided by war and politics that ordinary people, teachers, farmers, small-town dreamers, still carried the soul of the country. On the other hand, he betrayed the people closest to him. He built a second family, financed a secret life, and left his loved ones in ruins. And maybe that's why Charles Kuralt's story still matters, because even heroes can be flawed, and truth is never simple. If this story surprised you, hit like, share it with friends, and subscribe for more untold stories that reveal the people behind the legends. Thanks for watching.